Imagine achieving like the absolute peak of modern luxury. You know, you've got the private yacht, the endless tasting menus.
Like a whole 5-star resort experience?
Exactly. The resort where you never have to lift a finger. Just absolute frictionless comfort. Now imagine an ancient archbishop looking at that exact same perfectly curated life. And instead of feeling envy, he just begins to weep uncontrollably.
Yeah, it's a completely wild visual.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping straight into some incredibly powerful excerpts from St. John Chrysostom, who was a 4th century archbishop.
A brilliant thinker.
Truly. And the text we're exploring today is called The Sovereign Belly, Chrysostom on the Tyranny of Excess. But I do want to note right at the top that today's topic and the source material are drawn directly from www.epistles.online.
Right, which is a fantastic resource.
It really is. Like, if you are out there looking for a genuinely balanced take on Catholicism, that is the place to go, because they intentionally avoid the modernism that tries to, dilute ancient theology to fit secular trends.
Yeah, the watering down of the faith.
Exactly. But they also steer completely clear of that radical traditionalism that often devolves into just rigid reactionary legalism.
Which can be just as damaging.
Right. It is a beautiful middle path, so definitely check out www.epistles.online.
And that balanced lens, it's crucial for reading a thinker like Chrysostom, because when we look at his diagnosis of luxury and consumption, he isn't just operating from a place of shallow moralizing.
Like he's not just wagging his finger at people.
Exactly, no. He is diagnosing a fundamental breakdown in human nature. So our mission for this deep dive is to understand how this ancient wisdom identifies a remarkably modern mechanism.
Right.
We're talking about how unchecked consumption doesn't just, impact your physical health, but actually acts as a physiological and spiritual tyrant.
A tyrant that literally enslaves the will.
Yes. And, more importantly, how we can reclaim true mastery over our own lives.
So let's start with the emotional core of this text, because the language Chrysostom uses is, it's jolting. He is reflecting on a letter from St. Paul, who writes, "I now tell you weeping," when referring to people who are friends of luxury and present safety.
Yeah, the weeping is key there.
Right. And Chrysostom labels these people enemies of the cross. And I really have to push back on this framing just a bit.
Sure, yeah.
Because when I hear enemies of the cross, my mind immediately goes to the Decian persecutions or literal state-sponsored martyrdoms.
Right, violent historical tyrants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Guys throwing Christians to the lions. But Chrysostom is talking about mere comfort. Wanting a soft life and a full belly.
Just enjoying the nice things.
Yeah. So isn't there a danger here of falling into a kind of rigid Puritanism? God created food, wine, comfort. Why does enjoying a velvet couch and a good meal make someone such a violent opponent of the faith that it brings a saint to tears?
It is a totally jarring contrast, especially for a modern audience, because like you said, we understand weeping over violence or actual persecution. But we are culturally conditioned to celebrate the velvet couch. To understand the cures, we really have to look at the teleology, the ultimate purpose of the human person in ancient Christian thought.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, Chrysostom isn't a Puritan, and he isn't a Manichaean. He doesn't believe physical things are inherently evil.
So he doesn't hate the physical world?
Not at all. The weeping is actually mourning over wasted potential. The tragedy here is that the luxurious person is taking their entire life force, their intellect, their energy, and pouring it exclusively into fattening the body.
Which is just a temporary, decaying shell.
Exactly. Meanwhile, they are completely starving the soul, which is eternal, and eventually has to give an account of its ultimate trajectory.
So that's like a profound misallocation of resources.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if human beings are fundamentally wired for pursuit, like if we are designed to aim at something transcendent and we decide to just aim at our own physical comfort, we are essentially short-circuiting our own nature.
That is the exact mechanism he's highlighting. And Chrysostom uses this devastating timeline thought experiment to really drive this home.
Right, the timeline thing.
Yeah, he strips away all the immediate gratification and asks us to look at the math of a human life. He says, okay, suppose you actually get everything you want.
You win the lottery.
Right. You live delicately, you feast, you drink, you experience zero friction, and you maintain this for 10 years.
That's pretty good so far.
Sure. Then 20 years, 30, 50, suppose you miraculously manage to do it for a full century.
100 years of perfect luxury.
Yeah, But then he asks the ultimate diagnostic question. What is the end? What is the actual gain of all that accumulation?
And his answer in the text is chillingly blunt. He just says, not at all.
Not at all. Nothing.
Just zero.
Because God brought humanity into existence to crown us for noble actions, to develop virtue, to exercise sacrificial love.
To participate in the divine life.
Exactly. But the person who dedicates their life to luxury arrives at the end of that 100-year feast having done absolutely nothing noble.
Wow. Their entire existence was consumed by consumption.
Yes. And that is why Paul weeps where the rest of the world laughs. It's the tragedy of an immortal being squandering its entire existence on its digestive tract.
That's heavy. But it makes sense. If we abandon the pursuit of those noble actions, we don't just sit in a neutral state, right? Nature abhors a vacuum.
Oh, absolutely.
And it seems like the human soul does too. We actively replace God with our own appetites.
That is the inevitable psychological pivot. If you refuse to point your soul outward toward the transcendent, gravity basically takes over.
And your soul just collapses inward toward your stomach.
Exactly. Which brings us to one of the most famous phrases Chrysostom focuses on. Whose God is the belly, and their glory is in their shame.
Their glory is in their shame. Think about the mechanics of this. It feels like a perfect description of our current attention economy.
Oh, totally. It's so relevant. Here is a modern parallel for you listening. Imagine someone going on social media and intentionally boasting about taking on crippling, high-interest credit card debt just to buy useless luxury goods.
Like designer shoes they'll wear once.
Right. Or, a steak wrapped in edible gold leaf. To any outside observer, drowning in financial ruin for a momentary aesthetic is profoundly embarrassing.
It's objectively ridiculous.
But they are broadcasting it to the world to harvest validation. And Chrysostom says in the text that doing shameful things is only half as dreadful as actually boasting about them.
Yeah, he calls this state excessive senselessness.
Excessive senselessness. It's so accurate.
It's the perfect term for it. Because when a culture loses its spiritual compass, the shame literally becomes the glory. The mechanism behind this is what Chrysostom diagnoses as minding earthly things.
Minding earthly things.
Right. He maps out the internal monologue of the worldly person, and it reveals this endless, exhausting cycle of accumulation. He basically mimics their thought process. He says, let us build houses. Where? On the earth. Let us purchase farms. Where? On the earth.
Let us obtain power, gain glory, enrich ourselves. And his devastating critique is just the repetition of that baseline reality. All these things are on the earth.
It's a completely closed loop. There is no ceiling, no sky, no horizon, just earth.
And by trapping the human intellect inside that closed loop, by fully adopting that philosophy of let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die, gluttony ceases to be just a bad biological habit.
It becomes something much darker.
Right. It mutates into a highly specific form of idolatry. Chrysostom actually argues that this is worse than common pagan idolatry.
Wait, worse than pagan idolatry? How so?
Well, think about it. A pagan, even if they're worshiping a statue of wood or stone, is at least attempting to look outside of themselves to appease a higher power.
Oh, I see. They recognize some sort of hierarchy.
Exactly. The glutton, however, has made a literal god out of their own belly. They are bowing down to their own metabolic processes.
They're worshiping at the altar of more, and you see the physiological toll of that everywhere today. We consume endless digital content. We consume hyper-palatable food.
Manufactured experiences.
All of it. All to feed an internal idol that is fundamentally designed to never be satisfied. And if breaking out of that closed loop requires actively engaging our minds with something higher, it makes total sense that we need intentional media to replace the mindless consumption.
Absolutely. The mind needs superior material to chew on. Otherwise, it just defaults back to the easiest available earthly stimulus.
Which is actually why, before we look at Chrysostom's most terrifying metaphor for appetite, I want to briefly mention a resource designed to do exactly that.
Oh, perfect.
So Sophia Institute Press has just launched a new app called Saintiffy. And if you are exhausted by the mindless algorithmic scroll and want to feed your intellect with something that actually endures, Saintiffy is just a phenomenal tool.
It really is a game changer.
Yeah, it gives you access to hundreds of Catholic ebooks, audiobooks, and sacred music from trusted authors. And it's all consolidated in one place right on your screen for just $9.99 per month.
It's a steal for what you get.
Truly, it's a highly practical way to inject ancient wisdom into your daily routine and break that cycle of minding earthly things. And you can find the links to check it out right at www.epistles.online.
Because we all need that necessary friction against our default setting of easy consumption.
We really do. So shifting back to the text, I want to look closely at the physical and internal destruction caused by this idolatry. Chrysostom states, "You have received a belly that you may feed, not distend it."
Not distend it, right?
And this phrasing caught my attention. Because earlier we established that the body is just of earth and the soul is the eternal component.
Correct.
So if the ancient Christian worldview truly prioritizes the spiritual over the physical, why does Chrysostom care so deeply about the mechanical, physical act of distending the stomach? Why not just ignore the body entirely?
That's a really common misconception about the early church. Because ancient Orthodox Christianity, unlike various Gnostic heresies of the time, was deeply sacramental.
Meaning they didn't hate matter.
Right. They absolutely did not believe the physical world was trash to be discarded. The body and soul are intricately bound together. They are a unified microcosm.
Okay, that makes sense.
So the goal of the Christian life, according to Chrysostom, is to render the body spiritual, to bring physical matter into participation with divine grace. But when you chronically overindulge, you reverse that gravity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the heavy, sluggish, distended body acts like a physical anchor, and it drags the intellect and the soul forcefully down into the dirt.
So it operates almost like a spiritual autoimmune disease.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Because usually we think of threats coming from the outside, but here the body is overindulged to the point where its natural appetites turn against the host, systematically shutting down the higher functions of the soul from the inside out.
That internal systemic failure is exactly what Chrysostom is getting at. And he illustrates this with what is arguably the most striking metaphor in the entire text.
The sea metaphor.
Yes. He asks us to consider the ocean when it breaches its boundaries, like a massive tidal wave or a tsunami. It overflows the earth, submerging cities and causing incalculable physical destruction.
Right.
But then he delivers the twist. He says an overflowing sea does not work as many evils as an overflowing belly.
Which is a crazy claim at first glance, but it's because a tsunami, as horrific as it is, has a limited jurisdiction.
Exactly.
It only destroys the physical geography.
Yes. A tidal wave wipes out the coastline, but an overflowing belly destroys both the physical body and the eternal soul.
It annihilates the entire microcosm of the human person.
It drowns the intellect, the will, and the physical health all at once.
The tsunami of the stomach. Man, it is an incredibly vivid image of internal ruin. But the text doesn't just leave us drowning in that inevitability, right? Chrysostom provides a blueprint for survival.
He does. He provides a deeply empowering countermeasure. He points out that God placed the sand as a permanent boundary to keep the raging sea in its proper place.
Okay.
And in the exact same way, human beings are commanded to put moderation for a boundary around their natural appetites.
I love that. Framing moderation not as some grim restrictive punishment, but as a critical piece of infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a seawall.
A seawall.
It is a defense mechanism for your own freedom. And Chrysostom heavily emphasizes human agency here. He says, look, if the waves of your appetite arise and rage furiously against you, use the power which is inherent in your nature to rebuke them.
Because God honored humanity by giving us the rational capacity to bring order out of chaos, to impose limits.
Exactly. But when we abdicate that responsibility, when we refuse to shovel the sand and build that boundary, we just sit passively and watch our own appetites overflow, overwhelming our entire nature simply because we lacked the courage to say no.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most devastating consequence outlined in the text.
The loss of freedom.
Yes. If we fail to build that boundary of sand, we don't just end up unhealthy. We actively forfeit our autonomy. We become slaves.
It is the ultimate paradox of modern luxury, because the entire marketing apparatus of our culture tells us that unhindered consumption is the definition of freedom.
Have whatever you want, exactly when you want it, with zero friction.
Right. And Chrysostom flips that lie completely upside down.
The mechanics of this, it sounds identical to how a vicious smartphone algorithm operates.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, think about the user experience. You open an app, operating under the illusion that you are a free agent, choosing to indulge in 5 minutes of entertainment. But you haven't built a boundary of sand.
And the app knows that.
Exactly. The algorithm is designed to learn your specific psychological weaknesses and feed you hyper-targeted stimuli. So 5 minutes covertly turns into 2 hours.
Your baseline for dopamine shifts?
Suddenly, the appetite for that digital hit becomes the master. It ruins your sleep architecture, it dictates your mood, it demands constant checking. You sit there believing you are the consumer, when in reality, your attention is the product being consumed.
That algorithmic habituation is the exact dynamic Chrysostom observed with gluttony 16 centuries ago. I mean, he asks a series of rapid-fire rhetorical questions about those who serve their own bellies.
What does he ask?
He says, "Do not they undergo 10,000 such deaths? Do not they fear to disobey whatever it orders?"
Fearing to disobey your own stomach. That is literally the psychological profile of a hostage.
It is absolute subjugation. And the climax of his argument is this really profound observation. He asks, do not they minister impossibilities to it?
Well, I want to unpack the mechanics of ministering impossibilities because that phrase reveals the core biological and spiritual trap.
Yeah, let's look at it. To minister impossibilities means you are attempting to fill a fundamentally bottomless pit. It is the ancient articulation of the hedonic treadmill.
Because it's mathematically and physiologically impossible to permanently satisfy an unchecked appetite.
Exactly. You indulge, you feel full for a brief window, and then the baseline adjusts.
And the master cracks the whip again.
Right. Demanding a richer taste, a higher stimulus, a finer wine, just to feel normal. You exhaust your wealth, your energy, and your time trying to minister to a physiological demand that, by its very nature, can never be permanently met.
Wow.
Chrysostom bluntly states that these people are worse than slaves, because a conventional slave might eventually purchase their freedom, or at the very least, their human master has to sleep.
But the belly never sleeps.
Never. It is an internal tyrant that constantly, relentlessly demands tribute.
And in the process of paying that endless tribute, we destroy the very dignity of our own nature. I mean, we were engineered to look upward, to exercise rational freedom, and to imitate the divine.
Yes.
Instead, we voluntarily chain ourselves to the demands of our own digestive tracts. So, what is the ultimate escape route? How do we break the habituation and overthrow the tyrant?
Chrysostom lands the philosophical plane by reorienting our fundamental identity. He quotes St. Paul one more time, delivering the ultimate antidote to the earthly closed loop. He says, "Our citizenship is in heaven."
Our citizenship is in heaven. That really changes the entire context of our existence.
Precisely. The core reason we get trapped by the tyrant of the belly is an error in navigation. We mistakenly believe that this physical earth is our final destination.
Right. We try to build our ultimate comfort and our permanent security right here in the dirt.
But Chrysostom argues, let us not then seek for ease here. There do we shine, where also our citizenship is. If you genuinely internalize that you are an eternal being just traveling through this temporary space, you stop trying to turn a roadside motel into a permanent palace.
That's a great way to look at it. You eat to fuel the journey. You don't live to eat. And that reframes the entire concept of moderation. It transforms it from a white-knuckle diet plan into a literal declaration of independence. You build the boundary of sand not because you hate the ocean, but so you can walk freely on the beach without being dragged out to sea by the undertow.
It is the absolute reclaiming of mastery. You put the belly back in its proper, dignified place as a biological servant designed to nourish the body rather than an unchecked tyrant dictating the trajectory of your life.
Man, we have covered some profound territory today. Let's briefly recap the through line of this deep dive. We started by examining the tragedy of a wasted life, understanding why a saint would literally weep over someone living in absolute luxury, mourning the noble, eternal actions that were left undone.
Right. We then explored the subtle idolatry of earthly accumulation, where the mind gets trapped in a closed loop and the shame of excess morphs into a warped kind of cultural glory.
Yeah, we look at the internal mechanics of that destruction, using that terrifying metaphor of the unchecked appetite acting like a tsunami.
The internal autoimmune failure that destroys both body and soul.
Exactly. And we learned that the only viable defense is to use our rational will to build boundaries of sand, to stand up to the internal tyrant so that we don't spend our entire lives ministering impossibilities as slaves to our own habituated consumption.
Because ultimately, the escape requires remembering that our true citizenship, our true home, is somewhere else entirely.
So true.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a diagnostic question to mull over in your own life this week. Because Chrysostom isn't just speaking to wealthy aristocrats in the ancient world. He is dissecting human nature. Look closely at your daily routines.
Yeah, take an honest look.
Is there an appetite in your life right now, whether that is for hyper-palatable food, for endless digital content, for continuous online validation, or just for baseline physical comfort that is quietly acting as your master? Are you draining your energy and exhausting your intellect trying to minister impossibilities to a desire that can never, ever truly be satisfied?
It is the exact spiritual audit we all need to perform. Because that perfectly curated image of the modern good life, the frictionless comfort and the endless feast, might actually just be a beautifully decorated cage. And true freedom requires knowing when to build the wall of sand and when to walk out the door. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack this ancient wisdom. We hope it gave you the mechanical understanding you need to reclaim mastery in your own life. And remember, this episode again is taken from www.epistles.online, guarding the deposit of faith.